Hello everybody and welcome to the channel. It's Polyester here, and today we're going to continue to explore the lore. This time we're going to talk about the Revelations memory logs in Tome 1, Awakening, because many of you believe that the lore entries there talk about the next characters, the survivor and the killer for the next chapter. So let's have a look and see what it's all about. So here we see the lore entries here for Revelations number 1. I have used the Orus to explore the memories of an unknown survivor who comes from a world where, from what I can gather, a cult for the entity exists. It's not a surprise or the first time I've seen such a thing, but the memories suggest she was a detective of sorts, trying to prevent a cult sacrifice before she was snatched for the trials. I'm not sure what happened to her, and we'll have to explore the fog to unravel more. So this is something they've talked about on the dev stream before, about whether or not cults that worship the entity exist. And we also see in this lore entry here that they talk about that the detective comes from a world where, which they've also alluded to the fact that the entity has the ability to travel to different dimensions with different worlds on it. You see them called here Terra Prima, Terra Dark, multiple versions of worlds that they are able to draw from. I have a clip here actually from a dev stream where they talk about some of this.
We've also established that the entity can go into parallel universe as well.
Does the entity have worshippers or cults dedicated to it in reality? Yeah, we asked the question, but I don't know if we answered.
No, we didn't answer. I think so. Yes, I think so.
Okay.
I think that there's some flavor text.
I know that the entity doesn't actually
that
appear unless a great tragedy happens, but are there people out there who know of its existence?
Yeah. Well, we established that Benedict knew from the real world. I think that there's some secret societies that know about the entity.
So not much more to go on about this detective from this paragraph here, other than you would think that they'd be a bitter enemy of the entity, knowing that these cults exist that would do sacrifices to the entity. Next, we're going to move on to the second entry, which is a little bit meatier and gives us some more information. I have culled imprints of a killer I have yet to observe. My best guess, judging by the nature of the crimes, is this brute is from Terra Dark. She lured men with love, robbed them of their savings, and fed them to her pigs. Lovely, efficient, and resourceful. The impressions of the memory are as follows. He stands framed in the doorway with flowers, a stupid smile on his dumb face. He has no sense that his days are numbered. Lonely soul made the trip for a wife. He thinks he'll get everything for a ring, her land, her farm, her savings. Won't happen. Won't go as planned. Not as he planned, anyway. It didn't for all the other lonely souls who answered her classified ad. She peers at his eyes and thrills at his ignorance, his long, dumb face, his false sense of superiority. He wrote her a poem. How sweet. She'll cram it down his throat when he's convulsing on the floor. She takes his poem and asks about his money. He has it with him. Packed his savings in a bag and made the journey for a new start. He'll get more than he bargained for. Way more. To the bank with his money. To the pigs with him. Now this is startlingly similar to a real-life killer. So my friend Sarah had said, wow, that really sounds like the story of Bel Gunness, and I didn't know who that was, and she said, you should check it out. So I did some research, and sure enough, it's startlingly similar to the story of Bel Gunness. So let's just show you some of this from this website here about Bel Gunness. The twisted tale of Bel Gunness, America's most infamous Black Widow killer. Bel Gunness wanted the American dream. She eventually found it through insurance fraud and killing husbands, children, and anyone in her way. Bel Gunness grew up dirt poor in the small Norwegian village of Selbu in 1859. Like many, she emigrated to the United States in search of the American dream. She found it in Chicago when she discovered a most ingenious way to make money. Insurance fraud, with a hefty body count, that is. Disaster always found Bel Gunness. There's the Gunness farm. To the outside world, disaster and tragedy struck Gunness an inordinate amount of times. Properties she owned mysteriously burned to the ground, while the closest to her tragically started to drop like flies. But there was always a silver lining for Gunness in the form of a large insurance payout. In reality, she was one of the first Black Widows and became a prolific serial killer credited with murdering around 40 victims, Hell's Belle, or Lady Bluebeard as she's often known, killed her husbands and even her own children. When she ran out of husbands, she attracted would-be suitors to her murder farm, telling them to always bring their savings. At 6 feet tall and weighing 200 pounds, Gunnis could certainly handle herself if one of her victims attempted to escape. Gunnis' penchant for murder and insurance fraud started shortly after she married her first husband, Mads Sorensen, in 1893, and together they opened a confectionery store and had 4 children, Caroline, Axel, Myrtle, and Lucy, and they also had a foster child named Jenny Olsen. With a husband, children, and a business, there were plenty of opportunities for Gunnis to claim insurance. The business burned down first, and then 2 of her children, Caroline and Axel, died from acute colitis. However, acute colitis and strychnine poisoning share some common symptoms such as abdominal pain, but this slipped past the corner and Gunnis got her money. Greed was Belle Gunnis' fuel. In 1900, her first husband, Mads, died on the day when his 2 life insurance policies conveniently overlapped. Gunnis received 2 insurance payouts for 1 life. The first doctor examined his body and discovered Mads had died of strychnine poisoning, but Gunnis' doctor overruled the finding and determined that he had died of heart failure, and yet again, Gunnis got away with murder. With plenty of insurance money in her pocket, she took her remaining children to LaPorte, Indiana, and in 1901, she bought a 42-acre farm at the end of McClung Road. Though a woman of means, she still wanted more. Soon after, a part of the farm burned down and she collected more insurance money. On April 1st, 1902, she married Peter Gunnis, a local butcher and a widower. Her new husband brought with him 2 daughters, who Belle saw as dollar signs. Not long after the wedding, 1 child died under mysterious circumstances. Peter knew something wasn't right, and he sent his eldest daughter, Swanhild, to stay with relatives. She was the only child to survive Gunnis. Belle Gunnis' body count grows. As it turns out, Peter should have left too, because in December of 1902, he died when a meat grinder fell off a kitchen shelf onto his head. Gunnis' daughter Jenny told schoolmates, "My mama killed my papa. She hit him with a meat cleaver and he died, but don't tell a soul." This time, the coroner noticed symptoms of strychnine poisoning and ordered an inquest, but no hard evidence was found, and Gunnis convincingly cried crocodile tears over her husband's death. However, they soon dried up when she cashed in Peter's life insurance policy. 6 months after Peter's death, Belle gave birth to his son, Philip Gunnis. With her second husband gone, she found a far more efficient way to get money. She placed ads in newspapers for well-off suitors to come to her farm, and many men traveled to LaPorte, Indiana, never to be seen again. In her letters, she had no problem convincing them to bring their money and not to tell anyone that you're coming. They bought shares in her farm by depositing their cash into Belle's bank account. When the transactions were done, she would then poison their food or hit them over the head with a meat cleaver. According to Jack Rosewood, author of Belle Gunnis, The True Story of the Slaying Mother, Historical Serial Killers and Murderers, she would dismember the bodies and either feed them to her pigs or bury them in the hog pen. So you can see here the parallels to the lore of Dead by Daylight. On the morning of April 28, 1908, her farmhouse burned to the ground, where town authorities found the bodies of Belle's 3 children, Lucy and Myrtle Sorensen and Philip Gunnis, in the basement. They also found the corpse of a headless woman thought to be Belle Gunnis. Aysel Helgelane steps in. Originally, authorities believed that Belle had been murdered, but several days after the fire, Aysel turned up looking for his missing brother, Andrew, one of the men who had fallen for Gunnis, and he was well aware of the correspondence between him and Gunnis. He was adamant that Gunnis had killed his brother and pressed the LaPorte County Sheriff to search the farm. Upon visiting the farm with a former farmhand, they stumbled upon soft depressions in the hog pen, and after some digging, they found a gunny sack containing 2 hands, 2 feet, and 1 head. He recognized the head to belong to his brother, and further digging at the lot yielded more. In the span of 2 days, investigators found the total of 11 burlap sacks, which contained arms hacked from the shoulders down, masses of human bone wrapped in loose flesh that dripped like jelly, Gunnis had followed the same pattern in butchering all of the bodies. The legs were chopped at the knees, the arms were hacked at the shoulder, and the head was decapitated. While it was challenging to identify the majority of the bodies, among the remains that were retrieved were those belonging to Gunnis' foster daughter, Jenny Olsen, who had been missing since 1906. Press was immediately lured by the sordid details of Gunnis' story. Before the finding of the dismembered bodies, the local press had been portraying Gunnis as a heroic mother who died in a fire. Soon, though, she became the Indiana Ogress, the female Bluebeard, and earned comparisons to Lady Macbeth. Reporters described her home as a horror farm and a death garden. People flocked to LaPorte as it became a local and national attraction, to the point that vendors reportedly sold ice cream, popcorn, cake, and something called Gunnis stew. It was crucial, though, to identify the corpse of the aforementioned headless woman, as failing to identify her could mean that Gunnis was alive somewhere, ready to carry on with her scheme. After combing through the ashes, investigators found dental bridge work belonging to Gunnis. The coroner deemed this sufficient evidence to confirm that the headless corpse belonged to Gunnis. But there is evidence that she faked her death, because this fellow who got pinned for her murder had brought a housekeeper who was never seen again here. Days before the fire, they had traveled to Chicago to find and bring back a housekeeper who was believed to have become Belle Gunnis' headless body double in the fire. Pretty grim stuff. So returning to the lore bit here, it's so similar. Beyond the pigs, like she would get them to bring their money and they would take it to the bank. Convulsing on the floor alludes to the strychnine poisoning. The ad, the lonely hearts, thinking that they're gonna marry someone. It's so on the nose for Belle Gunnis. It can't be anyone else, honestly. The third entry isn't really relevant to the survivor and killer that I talked about in the first two. It just talks about how the observer used to think they knew what the entity was and now more uncertain. Doesn't really have much to do with the potential for a chapter. So it's highly possible that this Detective Black Widow combination could be coming out as the next chapter in Dead by Daylight, or perhaps a future chapter. I kind of prefer the Alchemist theory as my primary, honestly. But this is, you know, as good a theory as any as well. What do we know about Belle Gunnis, assuming that she's inspiring this killer, is that she's a big woman and her weapon will probably be a cleaver. As far as what the power would be, no idea. Heck, for all I know, the Black Widow could be the Smasher, just breaking through walls and stuff, because she had the ability to overpower men, most certainly. So I found this quite fascinating, doing this research on Belle Gunnis and how it paralleled this character written in the lore here. And honestly, if there hadn't been a detective here as a corresponding survivor to go with this killer, you know, on the face of it, that's what it looks like anyway. I would wonder if they had just written this in as a historical person into the lore to make us think that the entity has grabbed Belle Gunnis from out of real life and brought them into the fog as she just disappeared mysteriously, the same way that people have often requested that Jack the Ripper come to Dead by Daylight, that maybe also the entity would grab Jack the Ripper and they'd be here in the fog as memories of the observer, but we would maybe never actually see them as characters. But the lore would just show us that some of the most villainous people in history have been taken by the entity, and that's why they disappeared and nobody knows who they really were or what actually happened to them. So, but I think the fact that there's a detective as a survivor and this Black Widow as a killer, it really looks like they're setting this up for a chapter in some way. If it isn't chapter 15, then further down the road. It really looks like a chapter to me. Alright, thanks for watching. That's all I have for you today. I hope you thought that was interesting, and it'll be interesting to see what happens when chapter 15 comes out. If it's going to be these characters from the Revelations lore, or if they're going to go in a different direction. As always, thanks for watching. Have a great day. See you next time. Bye-bye.